Hello everyone, this is Clive Swansbourne. Welcome to Piano Insights. Today we're going to be looking at one of my all-time favourite pieces for piano, and that's by Franz Schubert. It's his third Impromptu in G-flat major. It's one of the most beautiful long-breathed melodies in piano music, all of which, almost all of which appears in the treble, and a lot of which needs to be played by the pinky finger. I can only think of one other piece that's a couple of pieces by Chopin are like that, which require pinky almost all the way through. I think it's the 19th Prelude in E flat and the Aeolian Harp Etude in A flat. These are very hard pieces to play because you have to literally breathe long lines and shape them as beautifully as possible, almost entirely with one finger, and not only that, while you're playing the accompaniment in the same hand. So they are very they're taxing pieces. This is not a fast piece. It's not an athletic piece, really. It's a piece which is full of challenges to do with balance and voicing, and particularly in the right hand. For example, of course you have to shape the melody and make it beautiful, but also if the accompaniment starts to be too loud, it occludes the melody and things get jumbled and it gets confusing for the listener, and it's not nearly as beautiful. So we'll be looking at that. A little bit about the history of the piece. Schubert was in his mature years, all of 30. He died when he was 31, and he wrote an immense number of masterpieces in the last year of his life, or last 2 years or so of his life. Very, very active career he had at that time. I mean, he was always busy. In his 31 years, he wrote an incredible amount of music, absolutely breathtaking amount. But I think what's so surprising about his last year or so, even his last few months even, is the number of masterpieces he put out. I mean, he didn't write any weak music, it seemed to me, in those. It was like he knew he was dying. That's the thing. He had something which he knew couldn't be cured, so he knew his time was limited. He had syphilis, unfortunately. Very unfortunate that he got into that situation, because it was, I think, probably something he didn't do very often. I mean, I think it was just a very unfortunate evening out, as it were. And it landed him with an absolutely devastating disease, incurable at the time. People thought mercury was the thing to do, but of course it wasn't. And he, I think, he managed to find an escape partly through his music from the pain and the suffering and the agony that it must have been for him to be suffering through this illness. The composition of these pieces made life tolerable. I mean, we think of him languishing in hospital for treatment for months on end during the time that he wrote Winterreise, which was his most famous song cycle. And literally, if you can think of being deathly ill with flu, it was rather like that. And yet, he was up writing music. He wasn't just sleeping and trying to forget about everything. He was determined to keep working. It's a phenomenal story, really, I think. Very inspiring in its own way, but also extremely sad, of course, because he didn't live very much longer. He wanted to get as many masterpieces out as he possibly could in the time that he had. That was the only important thing to him. That was the thing that mattered most. So when I play these impromptus and the final sonatas and other works written in the final months, I'm always thinking of that. What a sort of hero, what a heroic stand to make. I mean, of course he knew he had to do it, and it wasn't like going to war and risking his life. No, in fact, it gave him more life to be working on this, to be doing this work. But still, I always think, wow, I mean, if I were in that situation, would I really want to just be working all the time, or would I just sort of give up? I don't know. It's very hard to know. I mean, if you're a genius like that, I think you're in a different boat altogether. So it's hard to imagine. But anyway, he did it, and he gave us all these magnificent pieces, astonishingly mature and astonishingly deep pieces for a 31-year-old. No other composer, I think, matches that at the age of 31. Not even Beethoven or Mozart matched that. I mean, Mozart matured immensely in his final 5 years or so. I mean, he was also by the time he was 30, he was writing magnificent music. I mean, there was no doubt about that. But I don't think it was on the level of the late Schubert works, the late sonatas and the impromptus and the string quintet and the string quartets. Phenomenal pieces of someone would think that you'd have to be about double his age to have written. And also he was at this time planning counterpoint lessons because he felt that that was a weakness in his composition. Amazing to think that such a master, even of counterpoint at this time, he was a comparative master compared with a lot of other people, but he felt that this was still a weakness in his makeup. Okay, well, let's look at this piece. It's an impromptu. Now, impromptu means improvised, but of course, these were not improvised. I mean, they're very highly structured pieces. The reason they're called impromptu was because a composer called Dvořáček, a Bohemian composer, at the time, reasonably well known. He's known now for being influential mostly on other composers such as Schubert. Well, Dvořáček wrote a series of impromptus which did very well, which sold very well. And Schubert shared publishers with Dvořáček, and his publisher said, well, look here, Schubert, why don't we call them impromptus? Because this chap, Dvořáček, is doing awfully well, making lots of money with his. So Schubert said, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. No argument there. So that's why they're called impromptus. This piece is really like a song without words. It doesn't have any structural changes. Like most of impromptus, you can see A, B, A. You have A, which is maybe flowing, B, which is more chordal, then A, which is more flowing again. You can see a distinct middle section. This is more complex, really, than that. It's sort of A, B, A, C. It's more rondo-like, really. Actually, I haven't really looked. Is it really a rondo? I'm not sure. I don't think it is, really. What it does have is a recapitulation at the end. But there's a series of episodes and a development section which seems to have episodes of its own, and that's typical of Schubert. It's a sort of development section. But in any case, it's just a long-breathed song without words which moves from mood to mood within the same rhythm. This triplet accompaniment all the way through, which takes us from the most serene, like the very opening lyrical measures, to the deepest, darkest realms of the psyche, where he goes all the way down into the depths of the keyboard. And then we have sort of outbursts of anger. He was very temperamental, Schubert. We think of him as sort of angelic and all that, but, of heavenly melodies and so forth. But he was, in fact, quite temperamental, and you see this in his music. I'm not suggesting he was temperamental when he was writing his music, but he definitely knew what being temperamental was and being highly emotional and volatile was. And we see that in this piece as well. In a lot of Schubert's late music, we see that. And as soon as the outbursts happen, then the calm comes back. And we see this is what gives depth to this kind of music. This is what puts his impromptus on a different level from the promptus of Dvořáček. And in parallel, you could say that about Chopin and his nocturnes being on a different level from the nocturnes of John Field, which were the original nocturnes which Chopin knew and studied and modeled his early nocturnes on, but instantly transformed by his own genius. I mean, Field's pieces are very attractive pieces, like Dvořáček's impromptus are very attractive, but they don't plumb the depths that Chopin's nocturnes do. Chopin just expands the nocturne to a whole different genre, and so does Schubert in these impromptus. The opening melody could more or less, be thought of as something that maybe Dvořáček could have composed. It's just a beautiful lyrical melody. Absolutely gorgeous. That's sort of the mood and the lyricism which someone like Dvořáček would continue to develop. and not get temperamental. In Schubert, however, we see him immediately moving out of this lyrical strain into something a bit less calm, even at this early stage. You see a little bit of perturbation here. It's still very lyrical and still very melodic and everything, but he's moving out of this comfort zone. We've changed key. Sort of mini climax, really. He doesn't mark forte or anything, but we already see the seeds of a lack of calm coming in the future. Now, the main problem here, if you start, when he has these crescendos, if you start crescendoing all the notes, it soon becomes too thick. So I'll play just this part here. You see, I didn't do any crescendo here, because if you do in the accompaniment, this is what happens. These take over. They really become too much. So you really have to just crescendo in the main melodies, the notes. You don't have to do it in the accompaniment, because you don't want it to be fortissimo. Now later on, when we have fortissimo, yes, you can support the crescendo with the accompaniment notes, but I think that earlier on in page 1, you should really keep the accompaniment notes down to a minimum. And I find on a lot of pianos which aren't highly voiced, I mean very highly voiced pianos, you can be fairly free with the fingers, but if they're not, if the piano is at all bright, which mine is, I really find that I have to keep the fingers extremely close. So it's good training anyway, because if you practice on a soft piano and then you have to play on one which is very bright, you might find that harder to do. So it's very good training on all those little patterns to be able to play them very evenly and very softly without letting go of the keys. In fact, just being in touch without even letting go of them. I find that gives me much more control. It's quite hard to do, but once you get it, like all these things, it's definitely worth doing. You don't want to be flapping around with the fingers on these accompaniments at all. Keep very close to the key. And so that you have plenty of freedom with the melody notes. You have plenty of freedom as long as you anchor them with very close-knit accompaniment fingers. We have these patterns after this is a mini climax, truly. It's not really a climax, but he says, I'm already calming down off that. We're coming down off that little rise. Let's just call it a rise. These are hard to make really. They are beautiful, but if you just play them plain, they're not nearly as beautiful. For every rise, there's a fall. And I always think of these as him pouring balm on the wound. I mean, this wasn't really a wound, but we have wounds later on in the piece in the minor key, which are really quite searing. And he has these falling phrases. It's like drops of balm falling from an angel's wings or something, just to calm down Schubert. It's okay, it's going to be okay. And I feel this very much in these three little phrases. If you play them all the same, it's hard to do them that much more differently, but you can use rubato. The first one fairly, and then this one less. You see, don't land on that just the same way as you landed on that one. No, it's got to be less. And then this final one is the sort of the final cadence to the end of the phrase. And I like to use rubato here. Just nurture those two beats a little more, you see. We're not at the end of the paragraph yet, because he then plays this whole section again with slightly different harmonies. This note kind of interesting here. And then that nice. And then here, he starts introducing these very important, very low notes in the bass. These become very important later on too. Not only in climaxes, like we have here, but in very pianissimo parts. He loves mysterious bass notes colouring the piece. And then he has this descent again, but more chromatic. You see, not just... This time he has... And then in the left hand, beautiful variation of what we just had, but more expressive because of those chromatic notes. Not just, but, and then a little major chord there. This is the end of the first section. Now we're moving to the minor, and this is much more troubled territory coming up. Don't do that crescendo too early. You only want to do it at the very last moment. And not too loud. I mean, you don't want that. Just something that's... He has fortissimo later on. Don't be too violent. Most of it's in the tension of the sound and the tension of the rhythm, getting these really clear in the bass. Very important not to play them too loud, but if you go, if it's at all not clear, clarity is the main thing here. If it's not clear, it's just muddy. It's like a duet. We've got this and... Sorry. And then... It's like a little duet between two excitable people. And then we're back to this. And then here we have a variety of this. Pianissimo territory here. He's poured balm on the wound. You see all this. By the way, I must, for people wanting to memorize this piece, the first one here, that's what happens the first time. The second time it goes. The first one is repeating that note, and the other one is goes down first and then goes down. It's very hard to memorize that. I mean, it gets very confusing. Which one is it? They're so similar. What I think of as the first one is it's coming down and it gets stuck on that and it's not being let in. It's more troubled. The second one, it is being let in. It's let in through the door to finish the phrase and to finish this part of the piece, actually. So I have a visual image of that as something being accepted the second time and let in the door. And so we have this beautiful transition from this very troubled part in the minor key with the bass rising up to an exquisite, angelic, one of these beautiful phrases where you have a descent from high up, you see, to calm everything down. Let me just go from this part. Mysterious territory. This, I think, I like to take a flowing tempo, and this is everyone plays this differently. I mean, pianists that I can think of, like, that comes immediately to mind, like Radu Lupu and Horowitz, play this almost the same tempo all the way through, and it's quite slow. It's gorgeous and beautiful, but I like to take a more flowing, perhaps a quicker, more sweeping kind of approach for most of it. And then when we get to these parts like this, and the very angelic parts, where you can take more time, I think, they're not pent up, they're not full of emotional energy, they're much more calmed down, they're deep breathing. You can take more time, and I think it makes it much more beautiful to do so. I take much more time on these things. Below tempo, and here this whole part, I think, sounds better if it's below tempo. Obviously the left hand here is the most important thing, the most interesting. So getting that balance is quite difficult. On most pianos it's very difficult to get it really sing out like an instrument, like a contrabassoon or something, if you were orchestrating it. These have to be super quiet here. Notice how it's no longer the minor, it goes into the major here, so different color. Rise up. For a moment we thought, because it was in the major, there might be some calm coming along. It's not to be. We rise up into another fit of emotion here. Wonderful contra motion here. Accompaniment quiet here. There we are with these mysterious things here. Don't cloud them, don't go. It just becomes like mud. No. Take up the pedal. Trills here, they're like drum rolls. It's like the end of a storm. I think of the end of the storm in the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony. There's a lot of turbulence in the lower, in the double basses and things, and then suddenly they stop and the sun comes out. This is similar to that, very sort of some turbulence down here. And when finally feel a release, like the thunder has stopped finally, and there's some peace. And another totally calm section here. Don't play it in time. You want to nurture that. It's amazing how much time you can get away with, I think, on these. If you balance it with a more sweeping tempo, I'm not saying this is the only way to play it, it's just the way I like to play it. And I always talk about varieties of different approach, and usually favour my own for obvious reasons. But I really think that if you look for the most character you can get out of a composition, rather than just creating beautiful sounds, if they're all kind of the same beautiful sounds, but the whole thing is at the same tempo, I don't think you're getting the most out of the piece. You're not getting the most character out of the piece, I don't think. So these are the reasons I choose those things. Now here we have, eventually we sink down after the balm is on the wounds and so forth. Bass, very important. No pedal, you've got to do finger pedaling here. And these have to come out. So forth, you see, and then we're back into the main theme again, and much the same, sort of a recapitulation, much the same kind of things. The last line is very interesting. We got this battle between the bass creating problems with emotional turmoil, and the treble coming back with these beautiful descending phrases to calm everything down. This is really the coda of the piece, actually. Bass has another go. In its tracks. Just take all the time you need for that. On this last one, it's just finally, this is, we've come to the end, you know, we've had a couple of these, and finally, and then it just rests. I think it's just one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written, actually. There are thousands and hundreds of thousands of incredibly beautiful pieces. But this will always be one of the special ones for me. One of my desert island pieces, maybe. Anyway, that's it for the Schubert G-flat Impromptu. Thank you for listening. Please share, like and subscribe. And I hope to see you in future videos. Thank you. Bye.